I am a time traveler, because the church needed a heretic with equations. They called it the Sanctum Chronologicum, though everyone in the lower corridors just said the vault. From above, the Vatican still looked like marble and saints. Below, it was coolant lines, leaded chapels, and a machine that hummed like a choir learning to breathe. They named the program Project Absolution. The idea was simple, the way knives are simple. Cut the wound, close it better. My name is Elias Vero. Once I solved wave equations for particle collimators. Then my daughter died on a Tuesday and I took vows on a Friday. Grief is a faster accelerator than any ring of magnets. The cardinal prefect of temporal doctrine had a file on both versions of me and concluded that what God had joined, no man should separate. He put a collar on a physicist and an access badge on a priest. They brought me to the chronotome at dusk, when Rome's bells made the air ring like crystal. The chamber looked like a basilica swallowed by an engine. Reliquaries sat inside Faraday cages. A fragment of a wooden beam, catalogued as lignum crucis, was clamped into a plasma conduit. Stained glass filtered neutrons. The heart of the thing was Hostia Zero, a wafer of superconducting lattice doped with consecrated iron, star metal reworked by hands that had held the Eucharist. We were going to ask history to open its mouth. "Understand this," said Cardinal Severin, his scarlet gloves folded, his eyes refusing to blink. "If you save the Son, you alter the Father. We petition, Elias. We do not revise." "We will observe first," I said. "Observation precedes intervention." "Observation is interference with better manners." He made the sign of the cross and touched the console. The console obliged by blooming with Latin headers over arrays of numbers. Every system in the vault was bilingual, scripture and firmware. Technicians in black cassocks threaded in and out of aisles, pinning relics to circuits the way sailors once pinned charms to masts. A litany sounded through the speakers, spliced with a startup sequence. Kyrie eleison scrolled next to compile logs. The choir above us started vespers. Below, the engine awoke like a sleeping animal, deciding whether to trust a hand. I wore a suit that could make my blood remember its own temperature. Around my wrist sat a chronograph the size of a book's closing, the Ion, built by Jesuits and people who used to work at CERN and then confessed it. It pulsed a slow green as Hostia Zero cooled. The sanctified vacuum sang. "Temporal anchor," said Sister Agatha, handing me a bronze coin stamped with a fisherman and a phrase. "Feed my sheep." "It isn't for the machine. It's for you." "I thought the anchor is the thing that holds the ship." "Or drowns it," she said, not unkindly. "You will not see a straight line where you're going. You will see a braid." On the wall, a digital crucifix flickered between years, 2199, 33, and zeros that weren't numbers so much as the idea of counting itself. My mission parameters floated in pale blue. Arrive in Jerusalem within 7 days before Passover. Observe. Confirm identity. Extract subject prior to arrest. Return. Do not be seen by authorities, angels, or your former self. The humorists in doctrine had left the last line. "Last chance," said Cardinal Severin. "You can say no." "No," I said, to the part of me that would have liked to fail politely. "I'll go." The chronotome opened like a rib cage. Light slid in rivulets across the floor, pooling around my boots, climbing my calves like river water in a flood. I heard the choir above shift into a minor mode and felt the engine match them. Agatha pressed 2 fingers to my brow. Severin touched Hostia Zero with the corner of a monstrance. The ion went white. time never cracked. It dilated as if embarrassed to be caught. The chamber stretched, the litany burned down to a thin line of sound, the air gained weight, then all of it snapped soft as a thread, and I was somewhere else, bent over, tasting dust. Jerusalem did not smell like the paintings. It smelled like iron, olives, animals, the thick human smell of fear that no incense can quite cover. I stood in an alley between a whitewashed wall and a vendor stall where figs sat in neat pyramids like small judgments. The sun was low, but it was not moving. It quivered. Everything quivered. The ion flashed, a tight staccato of warnings, bifurcation risk high, local time index unstable, observation vectors unknown. A child ran past me twice, the same laugh, and the same strip of linen unraveling from his sleeve, the same dog chasing him and failing at the same corner. I watched the dog's paw miss the fruit crate by the same half-inch 3 times before the 4th pass landed true, and figs tumbled with the sound of soft bones. The vendor swore in Aramaic and then in the same breath apologized to Greek to a soldier who had not yet looked up the previous 3 times. This time he did. His gaze slid across me and stopped as if it had been waiting for this particular moment. He frowned. He did not know me. He recognized the wrongness around me, the way fish recognize a net. I moved. The city moved back. He looked away, not because he decided to, but because something else decided for him and made it feel like his own choice. I followed the current toward the temple because every current runs there. The ion tagged faces for me and then untagged them an instant later because the faces were not the same faces anymore. Time had a stutter. I passed men arguing about taxes, women arguing about bread, and boys arguing about stones. On a corner, a beggar extended a hand that shook like a leaf with an insect chewing it. I gave him the coin Agatha had given me, and we both felt something pass through both of our hands, and neither one of us could name it. A square opened, and I saw him. He was not what the icons promised. He was not what my rebellion wanted him to be. He was a man whose presence altered the geometry of the place. People around him leaned without leaning, as if the ground itself had a slope when he stood on it. Light obeyed him the way fish obey a net, not trapped, guided. He looked at me over the heads of strangers and named me with a glance. The ion, which has no soul, flinched. Across its glass, waveforms built and collapsed like lungs. It tried to lock onto a frame, and he blurred and became the frame. "Do not approach," the doctrine protocols whispered in my ear. I approached anyway, because grief holds its own sermons. A woman was speaking to him about bread. He took 5 loaves that were 7 and made them 10 that were 5. My head tried to call it replication. My training tried to label it a violation. The ion told me matter's history was being edited, not copied. Each loaf slid backwards along its own timeline into the place where it had been dough, and then flour, and then grain, and then seed, and then rain, and then whatever the word is for rain before the sky learns it. He did nothing that broke a law. He wrote the law's earlier clause in the margin and signed it. He smiled in the direction of the hungry and the machine. The machine understood enough to fear him. At dusk, the city became a bowl of copper. I did not sleep. The ion showed me 3 incoming trajectories that weren't roads but intentions. A man with a purse and a problem, soldiers with ropes and habits, officials with the weary posture of men who have convinced themselves that the best way to keep peace is to kill hope efficiently. I made my first mistake the following night in a garden where the air tasted like coins. I watched a figure approach with purpose and a kiss. I stepped out of the pattern. I touched his wrist. Judas looked at me as if down a long corridor and said my name like he had been practicing it.
The kiss fell somewhere else. The soldiers hesitated. The Ion screamed. Time flexed its hands and tried again with a different pair of feet in a different cloak, taking the same step. The name for that is not fate. It is architecture. The third time, a stranger I had never seen lifted a lantern and said the words Judas should have said, and the night came alive with the sound of boots finding their prearranged places. I understood then that I could not stop the arrest by cutting a thread. The loom had already woven alternate threads under it. On the hill outside the city, 3 wooden uprights were just poles, not yet crosses. The sun shivered and then for a tender, terrible breath, stopped pretending to move.
The Aeon warmed my wrist. Someone, from somewhere other than above or ahead, was washing the braid and counting the times I tugged at it. I could feel their attention like weather. Angels, Doctrine would have said. Custodians, my other life would have offered. I did not want to name them yet. I had work to do and a sin to commit with good reasons. I am a time traveler. I came to save a man who does not need saving. The problem, I was beginning to learn, is that trying is how the knife cuts.
Jerusalem had never slept, but in the folds between moments I found its silence. When time stuttered, it left seams, small gaps where everything held its breath. I lived inside those seams. The Aeon marked them as temporal eddies, but to me they were grace. I used them to move unseen, though I was beginning to suspect that seeing wasn't required to be known. Days, or repetitions of the same day, passed as I shadowed him. Jesus. The name carried a charge, a particle in language that rewired thought. His followers called him Rabbi, Master, Son of David. The Aeon simply registered a stable anomaly with mass undefined and coordinates inconsistent. Wherever he walked, probability behaved like a dog finding its master. I tried to understand through measurement. Each sermon altered local entropy. His presence smoothed statistical noise. Once, when he touched a leper, decay reversed itself, like a film played backward. Soras resealed, flesh rewove, blood remembered its own instructions. The machine recorded it as a localized inversion of time's arrow. I called it impossible. He called it mercy. He noticed me again 2 mornings later by the well outside Bethany. I hadn't spoken. I hadn't moved. Yet he turned his face toward me as if the air itself had whispered my coordinates. "Elias," he said. My throat locked. "You know me?" "I know the weight of those who come from after," he said. "You carry the smell of machines." I told him the truth, that I was here to prevent his death, that his sacrifice wasn't necessary in a universe with technology capable of rewriting loss. He listened as if I were describing the weather. "Do you believe pain can be engineered away?" he asked. "I believe suffering is a design flaw," I said. "You taught compassion, not martyrdom. If I can stop the cross, humanity keeps the lesson without the blood." He smiled. Not kind, not cruel. Just infinite, like light refracted through something too vast to hold. "You think the lesson is mine to give. It is yours to learn." The Aeon pulsed. Background radiation spiked, gravity flexed like fabric in a wind. The universe leaned closer to hear. That night, the first paradox occurred. My attempt to warn the disciples corrupted the timeline. Peter never denied him, because no arrest came. But without denial, faith had no contrast. The future I came from flickered. Rome vanished from the probability field. I saw continents melt into light. For 1 infinite second, there was no word for church. The Aeon rebooted with a new directive: preserve event integrity. Doctrine had built the failsafe into the machine itself. My body burned with it. Every heartbeat rewrote coordinates to drag me back toward the crucifixion. I tried to overwrite it. The code changed faster than thought, rewriting itself in languages I didn't know. Greek, Latin, something older that tasted of dust and creation. I fled into the desert beyond the city walls, where no century quite existed. The sand was a library of unfinished time, dunes whispering in dialects of decay. There, among half-built stars and mirages of history, I saw them, the custodians of the braid. They weren't angels the way paintings promised. They were vectors, tall as the horizon, bodies of glass and silence, wings like geometry and revolt. Their faces flickered between numbers. Each time they opened their mouths, the Aeon translated. Equilibrium must be kept. The Messiah's death is the anchor. Remove it and the equation collapses. I can balance it another way, I shouted. We can replace one act of sacrifice with another. We can offer... They moved closer, their light searing the air into equations. You cannot balance infinity. You can only witness it. When I returned to the city, everything had shifted 1 degree out of alignment. The disciples no longer recognized me. My footprints from yesterday had fossilized in the cobblestones. The sky had developed a seam down its center, light leaking through like blood through cloth. I found him again in the upper room, speaking softly while the others argued about prophecy. He looks tired, not weak, but burdened by knowledge too wide for the human frame. I stood in the doorway, trembling under the paradox that the man I came to save had already saved me by letting me try. You still intend to change it, he said without turning. Yes. Then remember this. Every time you save me, another world learns to forget compassion. They forget because it was never proven by pain. He placed his hand on mine. For a fraction of a second, I saw every possible version of him. King, beggar, soldier, child, star. Every timeline where he lived ended the same way. Silence so complete it looped back into song. When he withdrew, my hand glowed with a pattern the Aeon couldn't categorize. It said, "You've been marked." I know. Outside, the soldiers were already marching. The sky didn't darken, it deepened, like water remembering how to drown. I had time enough to realize that my mission wasn't to save him, but to understand why no one could. Then the Aeon announced what I already felt. Event horizon approaching. Crucifixion sequence imminent. Faith, I learned, is not belief in what will happen. It is acceptance of what must. And I had just made myself its witness.
The world began to slow, as if creation itself were holding its breath. Every clock inside the Aeon froze mid-pulse. Every voice around me dragged syllables like chains through honey. The machine registered a paradox cascade, temporal compression near the coordinates Golgotha. The event had begun. I ran. The crowd was already gathering, a tide of faces shaped by fear, faith, and the strange hunger of those who sense history about to break. The soldiers moved like automata, hands slick with purpose rather than cruelty. Their armor hummed faintly with static, residue of the distortion field that had begun to leak into the air. Time bent around the cross like heat above a desert. The Aeon screamed through my veins. Anchor point detected. Crucifixion sequence irreversible. "Override!" I shouted. But the command dissolved before it reached my lips. Every word I spoke fragmented into multiple versions, scattering across seconds that no longer agreed on order. Then I saw him. They had stripped him down to humanity. His body was torn, fragile, infinite. Light seeped from the wounds like code leaking from a broken system. The nails were not iron, they were vectors. Every strike synchronized with the beating of the universe. The sky dimmed, but it wasn't night. It was reality shading itself to survive the impact of what was being written. I pushed through the guards. Their eyes rolled white as I passed, their minds unable to focus on someone unanchored. My hands reached for the crossbeam, desperate to interrupt the geometry. The moment I touched it, the world inverted. I was no longer on the hill. I was inside the machine.
The chronotome surrounded me, half-built and ancient, a cathedral of circuitry humming in every century at once. Hostia Zero glowed in the center, pulsing like a heart, and bound to it, his silhouette. The crucifixion and the engine were the same structure seen from opposite ends of time. "Elias," a voice said from everywhere, "do you understand now?" It wasn't God, or maybe it was. It was the collective hum of existence speaking through the circuitry of creation. You are trying to save a moment that is not dying. It is recurring. It always recurs. Every birth of light requires a wound to pass through. I staggered toward the figure at the core. Then let me take it. Let me be the wound instead. A long pause. Then, would you know how to end? Yes. I tore the Aeon from my wrist and slammed it into Hostia Zero. The impact rippled through centuries. The chronotome's containment field collapsed, fusing my pulse with the timelines. I felt everything: the nails, the crowd, the scream of metal, the warmth of blood that wasn't mine. For a second, I saw multiple versions of the cross stretching in every direction. One carved from wood, another from light, another from thought itself. In one, Christ was gone and I hung there. In another, both of us did. In a third, there was nothing left, but a pulse of radiance echoing outward into eternity. Time recoiled. The sky split. Thunder without sound rolled through the bones of the world. People fell to their knees, not from fear, but from recognition. Something ancient had completed its loop. I awoke inside the desert. The same desert where I had argued with the custodians, only now the sand glowed from within. The Aeon lay shattered beside me, gears ticking with echoes. The air rippled. They appeared again. The glass figures with wings of mathematics. One knelt beside me. "The anchor holds," it said. "But you changed the vector." What does that mean? The event remains, but the burden shifts. The cross still stands, yet its witness has multiplied. I turned my gaze to the horizon. Above the dunes hung images like mirages, thousands of crucifixions unfolding in parallel, each slightly different. Some showed him, some showed me. In others, there was nobody, only light. Which one is real? I asked. All of them. None. The moment is constant, the participants rotate. Such is mercy. I fell to my knees. My body felt wrong, elongated by time, vibrating between centuries. The custodians spread their wings, and the sound was pure frequency, like radio static and Gregorian chant. You cannot destroy the sacrifice. You can only join it. When I opened my eyes again, I was back on the hill. The cross was empty. The sky was silent. Only the echo of nails remained pulsing through the earth like a heartbeat that refused to stop. My hands were bleeding where the Aeon had fused to my skin. A figure stood before me, dressed not in linen, but in the white of no spectrum, every color undone. His face was calm, almost human. He said, "You learned what even I had to learn." "That pain is necessary?" I whispered. "That love is a loop," he replied, "and someone must keep it turning." He stepped closer, pressed his palm to my chest, and for an instant, I understood everything. The mathematics of grace, the physics of redemption, the unbearable simplicity of cause and forgiveness. Then he was gone, dissolved into light that left no shadow. The crowd had vanished. The city below glowed like a dream half remembered. The cross stood alone against a sky trying to remember how to move. The Aeon flickered one last message against my skin. Mission unresolved, Subject integrated. I looked at my blood-stained hands and realized it wasn't failure. It was inclusion. The crucifixion would repeat, always. But I was now inside its mechanism, one more gear in the divine recursion that kept the universe turning. I was a time traveler. I tried to save Jesus Christ, and somewhere in the braid of time, he saved me back.
When I came back, the world had changed its grammar. Rome was gone, and so was the Vatican, yet their shadows were still written across the air like dried ink on invisible paper. The streets curved differently, as if built to honor an axis I could no longer see. The ion, melted into my wrist, pulsed faintly, a dying heart refusing the comfort of silence. The date on its interface was impossible. Infinity.00.00.33. I was standing inside a cathedral without walls. Pillars of glass reached upward into clouds that glowed with symbols instead of light. Every breath echoed, every echo formed words. It took me a moment to realize the words were mine. Every prayer I had ever whispered in fear or arrogance, replaying at once. A voice, his voice, rose among them. You tore the braid, Elias. You made a hole through which creation remembered itself. I turned. The figure stood in the center of the emptiness, dressed in the same simple cloth as on the hill, yet his eyes were no longer human. They shimmered with the reflection of every version of the world that had ever existed. Did I break it? Did I end the loop? You completed it. You thought the cross was a punishment. It was an equation. Love equals consequence. You cannot subtract one without erasing the other. The ground shuddered beneath me, the tremor of time rewriting. I saw flashes, countless timelines splintering, then merging. In some, empires never fell. In others, humanity never learned to pray. Each one folded into the next until they formed a spiral of light, anchored by a single fixed point, the crucifixion. That's the center of everything, I said, trembling. That's the constant. He nodded, and now you are its witness. Every time a heart breaks, every time a man sacrifices himself for another, every time forgiveness defies logic, you are there. Your machine merely helped you find where I always was. I fell to my knees. The ion circuitry cracked, bleeding light. My reflection flickered across the glass floor. For an instant, it wasn't mine. It was his. I don't want to be remembered as the man who failed, I whispered. You won't be remembered at all, he said softly. But you will remain. That's what eternity means. The light began to spiral faster, wrapping around us both. I felt the boundaries of my body dissolve, the sense of skin, bone, and guilt melting into something that pulsed in rhythm with the world. The cathedral's pillars bent inward, forming the ribs of a living engine. Hostia Zero was there again, suspended between us, still humming with divine residual energy. It rotated slowly, like a planet seeking a sun. He said, "Take it." I reached out. The wafer dissolved into my palm. For a second, I saw the entire map of time laid bare, the Big Bang as a heartbeat, Calvary as its echo, and the end of the universe as its reply. Every death was a data point. Every prayer was a line of code. The symmetry was unbearable. The machine inside me, what was left of the chronotome, began to sing. Its systems came alive, translating theology into motion. Scripture turned to light. Light turned to equations. Elias Varro, the voice of creation, said, "You have become what you sought, the traveler, the sacrifice, the proof." The sky cracked open. Stars poured down like sand. Each grain was a second falling backward. I saw every face I had ever known looping through lifetimes. My daughter smiled among them, untouched by death. "Will I see her again?" I asked. He smiled, not as a man, but as an answer. "You never stopped." Then the light consumed everything. For one breathless instant, I was nowhere and everywhere. The universe folded inward until it was no larger than a pulse behind my eyes. I felt the weight of every sin, every redemption, every timeline balanced perfectly on a single word. And that word was Amen. When the radiance faded, only the ion remained, floating above an ocean of time. It recorded one final verse that no human hand had written. Evangelium Machinae, Chapter 1. In the beginning was the time, and the time was with God, and the time was God. Then the device blinked once and went still. Somewhere in the eternal recursion, a man nailed to light whispered my name, and the universe exhaled. I was a time traveler. I tried to save Jesus Christ, and in doing so, I became the proof that he never needed saving.